All right, good morning, everyone. L'chaim. If you got yourself a drink, you're welcome to join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyah bidvaro.
Amen.
Amen.
So who's in person? We can't see.
Oh, let me turn her. Actually, I'm just plugging in a different video camera, so hopefully I'll be able to swiggle that around. Hold on. There we go. New video camera. We've got Shira.
Hi.
And we've got Vivian. And everyone else is welcome to join in person also. Actually, Lynn is joining also on Zoom now. All right. Good morning, Steve. Hello there. Nice to see you. Hi, Yaakov. And hello, Robin, of course. And Lynn is almost up to joining, so we will have her join also. We've got a special day. Tomorrow is Lag BaOmer. Tomorrow is the 18th of Iyar. It starts tonight, actually, by sundown, shortly after 8 o'clock. It's a very special day. Lag BaOmer celebrates Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who we learned so much about right here in our class with the Zohar. We actually just quoted the Zohar in the last few lines that we ended off last week with the Raya Mehemna. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he passed away on the 18th of Iyar. He actually requested that the day of his passing be one of celebration. He called it a Yom Hilulah, which means more of a wedding celebration, a great joyous celebration. And on the day of his passing, it says the level of his teachings was just so great that his students weren't even able to look directly at him during his teachings. There was a fire that was surrounding them in the great level of Rabbi Shimon's teachings. And he on the day of his passing, he was teaching some of the deepest Kabbalistic, mystical dimensions of Torah. And he was in the middle of teaching and he quoted a verse, and he stopped with the word Chaim, which was a verse that he was quoting with the word Chaim, which means life. And he stopped right there and he didn't continue. He passed away with the word Chaim on his lips. That's Rabbi Shimon. He was one like no other throughout Jewish history, a giant of Torah, and everyone wanted him to be buried by them. So his coffin ended up resting on Mount Meron, the mountain of Meron, which I had the merit of being several times there. Adina was actually there for Lag BaOmer. It's an area of great celebration. Unfortunately, last year it was a place of tragedy. After the year before, no one was able to go because of COVID. So last year it had a big influx, and I don't know exactly what happened. It's not that important, but either the police forces were not as trained because they weren't there the year before. Certain doors were locked, and ended up being a place of trampling where 45 holy souls perished on this holy day. So anyway, Lag BaOmer is a very holy day. It's our job to connect with God on a deeper level on this holiest of days. But with that, we'll continue studying our Tanya. We're up to chapter 41. Inside, we're on page 515. If you're looking on the Kindle, I'll be bringing it up in a moment. We're in the middle of a beautiful section where we're talking about the genuine or the authenticity of how we serve Hashem with the truth of our heart, not for quenching our own desires, our own thirst of our satisfaction and our connection with God, but rather like that of a child who exerts himself. This was actually a quote from the Zohar, for his father and mother, whom he loves more than himself, more than his own soul. He only wants to carry out the will of his parents. And that's really how we are to see ourselves in our relationship with Hashem, in such a full devotion and commitment that we're not there just to be satisfied in our fulfillment of the mitzvah, rather to do it with the sole desire of connecting with Hashem and fulfilling the desire that Hashem has. So every mitzvah we fulfill, we are fulfilling the will of God. Every Torah that we study, we are connecting and fulfilling the wisdom of God. And that is where we're up to. So 515, top paragraph. If you're looking in the Kindle, I will be sharing the screen right now. And here we go. Okay, I hope everyone can see the screen. Right in the middle of the page. And I will look in the Kindle so I can turn the pages. All right, here we go. Any questions before we begin? Okay, then we'll go in. Unlike Kabbalah's awe and reverence, which are inherently devoid of self-interest and emotion of love, even the love of God. So Kabbalah, so let's stop for a moment. Reverence, or in Hebrew, yira, and Kabbalah, which is the commitment to God, of God's authority, those don't have any self-interest. When you are committed, when you have reverence, that's totally about the other person that you are committing to, or about God, obviously in our case, that we are committing to. But on the other hand, the emotion of love, even the love of God, is nearly always tinged with self-centeredness. I love. As soon as there's an I, there's some self-centeredness there. Only those who have reached a very high degree of emotional maturity, is known as Ahava Rabbah, which means the great love, can have a love which is exclusively for God, at the level of a child who is also a servant. And above, we mentioned this in section 6. That was the ideal, where you have the servant-like mentality, which means you're fully devoted and committed. And you also have the love of a child to a parent in your relationship with God, which is that you're fully in love with the other person. You don't have the self-centeredness, rather it's all exclusively a mature love. It's exclusively a love for God. Nevertheless, even though to have a genuine intent when saying this Kabbalistic kavanah. So again, to go back from last week, if you remember, the kavanah that we are focusing on is the 2 lines that we say in our daily prayer before the Baruch Shamar, which is L'Shem Yichud Kucha Brichu Shchinte, which is to unite God's holiness, God's holy name, with His Shekhinah. And we explained that the kavanah is to bring this higher level into the world, to serve God with a genuineness and authenticity. So even though to have genuine intent when saying this Kabbalistic kavanah, which seem beyond the reach of most people, everyone should practice this kavanah regularly and at least try to mean it genuinely. Because even if you don't mean it with absolute genuine conviction of your heart, and you don't desire it with all your heart, nevertheless, to a very small extent, at least your heart does desire it genuinely, as a result of the innate love found in the heart of all of Israel, which represents an innate embodied desire to carry out whatever the divine will may be. And this merging of God's infinite light with the Shekhinah, the source of the souls of Israel, is in fact the real divine will. So obviously this idea is very deep, and the next couple paragraphs, as the translator, Rabbi Miller, he will try to explain it for us with a little bit more depth. But if you remember, all this is based on a kavanah that we have. Really, we're supposed to have it before every mitzvah, but we said we do it once a day, and that covers the day's worth of mitzvahs and our prayers. And we were supposed to be conscious in this meditation that our mitzvah that we fulfill, it connects our souls with the depth of God, with the depth of God's name, and also the souls of all of Israel is connected through my performance of a mitzvah. So even, and some people called me after the class and texted me, and I don't think Barbara's on the class today yet, but even if a person fulfilled a mitzvah without the right intent, when you go back and you do a mitzvah, that mitzvah again, with the right intent, it elevates all the previous fulfillments of that mitzvah, as long as now you're able to do it with the right kavanah. And over here, the depth of the kavanah we're having is that my mitzvah is connecting my soul, but also the souls of all of Israel with Hashem. And that was what the prayer is, and I think it's on page 30 in the Siddur, for those that asked me last week. To unite God's name with the Shekhinah in the name of all of Israel. That was with the root name of all of Israel. That was what we learned last week. So over here, what we're adding is, even if you can't have the full intention in the kavanah, but as long as you're doing it with a genuineness, that you're doing it for God, that itself counts as the mitzvah being fulfilled with full kavanah. And I think I've mentioned this before from the Arizal, that sometimes we try to understand the words of prayer, and it could be very hard, because we have to get on with our day, and prayer, especially if we're saying it in Hebrew, could take a long time. But as long as you can have the simple kavanah, as the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria says, that I am praying with the thoughts of this sincere child. Ani mispalel al das zeh hatinok is his words. I want to pray like this child. And we know, and there's some beautiful stories that some of you have heard from me in the past. I'm sure Vivian and Shira, you guys heard from me. You've been at before our Tanya class. We had other classes, so I'm sure we've discussed this before. But one of the beautiful stories is from the Baal Shem Tov, with the power of prayer, where it was the night of Kol Nidre, and it was the Baal Shem Tov was extremely serious. Usually, the Baal Shem Tov would pray with a lot of joy, and in his circle, the synagogue, there was a lot of joy in the davening, in the prayers. In that synagogue, in which anyone knows where the Baal Shem Tov lived? Yaakov, help me out over here. It was in a town in the Ukraine called Mezhebush. Try to say that 10 times quickly. Mezhebush. And there was a child who came to daven, and he didn't know a word of Hebrew. He was ignorant. He was a farmer boy. He never went to Cheder for a day in his life. But he sees all these people deep in prayer, and he sees the Baal Shem Tov very stern in his prayer with a white face, and everyone understood that there's a decree that's happening in the heavens, and the Baal Shem Tov was obviously very serious, trying to combat this spiritual decree for their community for the year, and everyone was in deep tears. And this young boy who came to davening, he didn't know how to pray. All he knew was the sound that the chickens and the roosters make from his farm. So he started singing like a chicken. He started singing like a rooster. And he started singing kukariku, which is the sound the rooster makes. Kukariku. That's what he was saying, kukariku. And everyone's turning to him, trying to get him to be quiet. We're in the middle of prayer. Why are you saying the sounds of roosters? But that's what he knew. And the Baal Shem Tov was listening to this sound of this innocent child. And he said, let him be, let him be. His prayer is piercing the gates of heaven. His prayer is reaching even further. It's the sincerity, the way a child can pray. And when we pray, we should have that sincerity also. So obviously we should try for the deepest kavanah. But at times when we realize even the sincerity of our davening with the pure, unadulterated simplicity of that prayer, that could reach even further. I just read that story again. It was on my mind. I just read it. The Rebbe actually just shared the story to someone in a private audience. So I thought I would share it now as well. It fits in nicely. Okay, so let's see the commentary now, which is in the middle of the Kindle page towards the bottom of 515, as he explains. As we discussed at length in chapters 36 and 37, the divine will is for a home for God below, for God's otherworldly light to penetrate and inhabit our ordinary worldly context. But otherworldly light can't just come into this physical world without major changes happening in the chain of spiritual worlds above. There's a reason why that light didn't come down here in the first place. So in order to get this otherworldly light into this world, that change is essentially a modification in the way that the highest spiritual world of Atzilus works. Shechina, which is the lowest attribute of Atzilus, Malchus, the last letter of the Tetragrammaton, is a light which is inherently compatible with the lower created worlds. All the other lights above it are incompatible and inherently otherworldly. So for that otherworldly light to come down into Shechina and thereby to the world, something major has to happen. The incompatible has to become compatible, and that's the essential point of the kavanah. For the sake of the merging of the Blessed Holy One, incompatible otherworldly light with the Shechina. So just to summarize, it's been a week since we delved into this. So just one more time, the Shechina is the godliness, the way it's enclothing itself in our world. It's come from the word shochein, which means rests. Some of you are familiar with the word mishkan, which is the name in Hebrew for the sanctuary of God, which is the way God rested in our world in the sanctuary. So it's from the same root. A neighbor or a neighborhood, a neighbor is called a shochen. A shchuna is a neighborhood because it means we all rest, we all dwell together. So the Shekhinah of God is God's divine presence, the way it's coming into this world. So that's the worldly light of God. In Kabbalistic terms, we have a name of God which is comprised of 4 letters. It's Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. It's known in Hebrew as Havaya, which is the way we pronounce that name without it being fully pronounced, Havaya. It's comprised of 4 letters. The lowest of those 4 letters is the Hey. So that Hey, the lowest of those 4 letters, is the Shekhinah of God, the way that God's light is coming down into this world. Some of you are familiar with on Shabbos, when we pray, we face east like every day. But on Shabbos, there's one part of our prayer where we face west. We actually turn around. In the Lecha Dodi, Steve, do you remember when we do this? We turn around for one part of our prayer because basically we're welcoming the Shekhinah on Shabbos. The Shekhinah is the light of God that we are tapping into on Shabbos. Right, Steve? Does that sound right?
It sounds right, but that's Friday night, correct?
Yep, Friday night, the beginning of Shabbos. We're basically reaching to this level of Shekhinah and incorporating it into our lives. The Shabbos, that's what Shabbos literally means returning, right? We're taking the lower Hey of God and we're returning it to its higher source. Shabbat comes from the word tashuv, which means to return. We're bringing back the Hey of God, of God's name, back to its source. That's why some of you are familiar. If you've been to Jerusalem, hopefully you have. We go to the Western Wall. Why is it the Western Wall? Because out of all the walls, the only one that was retained was the holiest is the one that's in the west. The Western Wall. That's where God's Shekhinah resided in the west part of the Holy Temple. It was called the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. It was in the western part of the Temple Mount. So the Western Wall, which was the closest to the Holy of Holies, that the holiness there remains. So on Friday night, we face west to welcome that holy Shekhinah into our lives and return it to its higher source. So all that is a little Kabbalistic, but getting back to the point for here is what we are supposed to have in mind when we do a mitzvah is we're taking that Shekhinah, which is the lower letter of God's name, and we are bringing it to its higher source. So we're taking what seems to be incompatible with our world, what's higher, and we're bringing it into our world. We're bringing it to a lower level. And when we do the mitzvah, we're bringing it down, and also the Shekhinah is able to rise up. The incompatible, just to use the words over here, the incompatible has to become compatible. So that's what we're trying to do with our kavanah, is merging God's holy name, what's incompatible, with the Shekhinah, which is the letter of God's name, Hey, that is coming compatible in our worlds. It's a lot of deep stuff we're learning.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
On Shabbat, when we turn to the west, do we turn left or right?
Oh, well, you're asking some deep stuff, Steve.
Yeah, directional.
So
does it matter? Do we pick it ourselves or we determine?
No, everything, it's, I wouldn't want to say we're always OCD in Judaism, but everything has a calculated reason of why we do things and has to follow a certain method. Some of you are familiar. So by the way, besides for Steve, is anyone else familiar with facing west on Friday night? Does that sound right to anyone? Does anyone else familiar with that part of our service? You're familiar with that, Shira? Vivian, does that sound right? At a certain point, by Lecha Dodi, the last paragraph, we face west. So Steve's asking which direction, which way do we turn west? Do we turn to the left or do we turn to the right? What we want to make sure we accomplish is that we do a full circle. Because Shabbos represents the full circle of the week, a full 7-day cycle. So we want to do a full circle. The idea of a full circle in Judaism is actually a very holy one. When a groom and a gift, a ring to his bride under the chuppah, it has to be a pure circled ring. And we don't even have any inscriptions inside because it's supposed to be a pure circle without any dents or anything else. We want a full circle. When we dance on Simchas Torah with the Torah, we make hakafot, which is full circles around the bima. We're supposed to make 7. But they have to be full circles. So when we turn to the west, we want to make sure we do a full circle. So you turn to one direction, you face west, and then you turn the other direction. So you actually do a full circle. With me? So we actually turn to the left, face west, and then we continue turning to the left and face back east, accomplishing a full circle. So my point, Steve, to you is you want to make sure you do a full circle and not whatever direction you turn. You don't want to turn back that direction. You want to turn the other direction. With me? So you do a full counterclockwise turn. My point is everything is calculated, even, and this is more off the record, even though we're still recording. And Yaakov, I'll take your question in a moment. Even when we take the Torah out of the bima, out of the ark, and put it on the bima, it's calculated which direction we put the Torah onto the bima and which direction we return the Torah back to the ark. We want to make sure we do a full hakafa, that the Torah makes it fully around the table. So it goes on from one side and it goes off from the other side. My point is everything is calculated in Judaism. It's when you have a holy Torah, meaning not just a Torah scroll, but in Judaism, everything is connecting ourselves with God and reaching a deeper level. So even the way we take something out and put it back, the way we wake up in the morning, everything is calculated in our relationship with Hashem. Yes, Yaakov.
Did you say turn counterclockwise?
Yeah.
Okay, I was taught just the opposite. I was taught that the way we turn is according to as Hashem has things, right? Which is in a clockwise fashion. You know, sun rising in the east and setting in the west. It does it in a clockwise fashion because we live north of the equator, right?
Who taught you that? Where did you learn that? I'm gonna look it up in the siddur, see if it says.
I learned it from a fellow named Rabbi Yishmael Cohen.
Oh, you mentioned him to me before. Okay.
Yeah, he's my uncle.
All right. I mean, it could be there's different customs. You know, at the end of the day, just turn around, do the prayer, turn back. You know, we're getting a little deeper in the Kabbalah of it. I'm just looking in the Chadodi now to see if it's.
He was like that.
I will. So Yaakov, now we know who your favorite rabbi is and who's always the correct one, because it says on page 158, turn to your left until you face west. And in the following paragraph, bow to the right and whatever. So anyway, turn to your left, which is counterclockwise.
So just turn.
One extra point for Rabbi Landa. Perfect.
I'll give you 7.
Yeah, Steve?
Can it be interpreted turning to your left as opposed to turning to your right? And does left represent Gevurah versus Chesed? So you're turning with discipline and conviction rather than with love? Is that your emphasis is on the left-hand side as opposed to the right side?
Yeah, you're right. Usually you would think we want to start with the right, like most things in Judaism. You start with the love. And why over here are we turning to the left? I don't know.
Is the weaker side, we turning towards the weaker side?
Seems like it.
I don't
know the reason.
Okay.
I don't know the reason. All right, we'll jump back in. So now I think that means we, on the book, let me just share it on this Kindle. And let's see where we're up to. Turning the page. I think that puts us on 516 in the book. Mm-hmm. So when we speak of a home for God below, there's both an effect and its cause. The effect is that otherworldly light inhabits and merges with this world. But the cause is, meaning what causes this home for God to happen here? It's the merging of the Blessed Holy One with the Shekhinah that makes the merging down here possible, to bring the incompatible light into compatible, meaning to bring it into this world, which means making a home for God in this world. To do that, you have to bring the Shekhinah of God back into its, the Holy Blessed One, back into the God's name. That's why the Tanya stresses here, this merging is in fact the real divine will, because it's the cause of God's home below, which is pretty cool. So obviously the goal is to bring godliness into this world, to make heaven come into earth, to make this perfect fusion of the two. But the real divine will, meaning what causes this divine light to come into the world. It's merging the Shekhinah of God with God's holy name, with the Blessed Holy One. So that's the cause that allows the effect to happen, to allow God's light to come into the world. So I know it sounds a little deep, definitely Kabbalistic. The point over here is, let's try to keep it simple, that when you do a mitzvah, you should have in mind that you are bringing godliness into this world by doing the mitzvah. And the way that happens, to do that, to bring godliness into this world, you're bringing the high level of godly light, which is incompatible with this world. To do that, you first have to get the Shekhinah to unite with its source, with God's holy name. That's the real divine will. Okay, let's continue. Continuing in the Kabbalah theme, this merging of the blessed infinite light and the Shekhinah, which we are speaking of here, is the same phenomenon as the integration of divine attributes above in the world of Atzilus that we discussed above in chapter 40 in the second note. So just to refresh our memory, we have the highest, we have 4 holy worlds. The highest of the 4 is the world of Atzilus. You don't have to remember how to spell that. In English, we refer to that as the world of emanation. It's actually the highest of the 4 worlds. It's the highest peak of the souls and worlds. For example, angels come from a lower world, but the soul of Moses and the soul of Joseph, for example, they come from this higher world of Atzilus. So now we've learned in the past that the Atzilus, like every world, has all 10 layers or Sefirot, 10 holy lights, from Chachma, Bina, Das, which we've learned about extensively, that then is parallel in our soul, but they have in godly soul powers, they're also in these worlds. Then you have the attributes of God, which is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, the kindness and love of God, the discipline and strength of God, the beauty and harmony, compassion of God, and 4 more, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. And for those that have been counting the Sphira with, and Shira actually brought her book, we are going through all 49 levels because the 7 attributes are comprised each of all 7 attributes. So today you have it up on the right date. Awesome. Yeah. So today, for example, is the Omer count of 32, which would bring us to Netzach of Hod. Literally, that would be translated as endurance in humility. I guess, I'll pause for a moment just because I'm getting sidetracked here. Our job for today is to examine the strength and endurance of your humility. Does my humility withstand challenges? Am I firm in my positions, or do I waffle in the name of humility? It's a good one. Humility and modesty should not cause one to feel weak and insecure. Netzach of Hod, which is today's Sephira, underscores the fact that true humility does not make you into a doormat for others to step on, or in Yiddish, shmata. On the contrary, humility gives you enduring strength. And the exercise is my humility perceived? The question is my humility perceived as weakness? Does that cause others to take advantage of me? Demonstrate the strength of your humility by initiating or actively participating in a good cause. Thank you, Shira, for bringing that. Awesome. So anyway, my point of bringing that, even though that was obviously very meaningful, is that in Atzilus, you have those divine attributes of God. We just mentioned 2 of them, of Netzach and Hod, which is endurance and humility. And what happens is, when you merge God's name of Atzilus, it's the integration also of the divine attributes of God, of the world of Atzilus. So let's just see that a little further. The Shekhinah is, in fact, the lowest attribute of the world of Atzilus. So when we spoke earlier about a mitzvah pulling down the blessed infinite light into Atzilus and integrating the attributes there, it's exactly the same phenomenon which is being discussed in this chapter. Again, the idea of a mitzvah bringing the infinite light of God into Atzilus and integrating with the attributes there, making unity between the infinite light of God and the attributes in the world of Atzilus. Over here, we're learning the idea of the mitzvah is bringing the light of God into this world from the way it is in Atzilus, from the higher, holier world. So as we explained there, I guess in chapter 40, the integration of attributes brought about by a mitzvah done on earth, an awakening from below. So again, we're doing a mitzvah here, and that's triggering a unity of light the way it is above. So when we do a mitzvah here, it's awakening from what's happening here, from the below level, from the world, from the human, which happens when a mitzvah is observed and results in your divine soul merging with and becoming absorbed in God's light found in the Torah and mitzvahs you are observing. And they become utterly one, as explained above in chapters 5. And now we're going through a few of the chapters. So this awakening from below also results, is that where we're up to? This awakening? That would, bottom of 516, this awakening from below also results in an awakening from above, namely the blessed infinite light shining in Atzilus and integrating its attributes. Because through this, you also cause the source of Torah and mitzvot, which is the other worldly divine energy referred to as the Blessed Holy One. That's otherworldly or incompatible, as we learned. So that's the source of our Torah and mitzvahs. We cause that to merge in Atzilus with the source of the worldly component of your divine soul, which is called Shekhinah. In a final note, the Tanya indicates other terms used for these same concepts. So buckle up, and some other Kabbalistic terms that we've discussed before. The worldly Shekhinah and other worldly Blessed Holy One energies are also referred to as the light which fills all worlds. In Hebrew, it's Memali Kol Almin, and transcends all the worlds, or in Hebrew, Sovev Kol Almin, respectively. As is explained elsewhere at length, see chapters 48 and 49. For those doing Chitas daily, today's daily Tanya is exactly this discussion in chapter 48. For those that are doing the cycle of Tanya based on the annual calendar, and I could help you study that with Rabbi Josh Gordon on a podcast. Whatever terms you use, the theme behind the purpose of creation, divine will, is the same. The merging of the compatible with the incompatible, the transcendent with the immanent, the infinite with the finite. That's a really nice paragraph to sum it up for us. So that will take us to section 10, and inner devotion. Yeah, I don't think we'll finish the chapter today. What do you think, Vivian?
No.
Okay.
I don't know.
That was a good try. All right, section 10, an inner devotion with every mitzvah. The Tanya now returns to our earlier discussion about awakening the natural love in your heart to foster a personal relationship with God. All right, so this past section was about what's happening through my mitzvah. It's doing great things in heaven. It's connecting the Shekhinah of God with God's divine name. It's connecting and elevating the root of the souls of all of Israel. That's what's happening with my mitzvah. But now, returning to our earlier discussion, when you have this natural love for God, a personal relationship with God is being developed. Let's see how that works. But while you may find it hard to genuinely desire the merging of these divine energies on behalf of the whole community, that's a really exhausting exercise to do daily. So that might be a little bit hard. Every person in Israel does have the genuinely authentic desire, at least for his own soul, to merge with and be absorbed in God's light as one. Every Jew, every one of us has that desire to be merged and connected with godliness and God's light, arising from the innate love which is dormant in the heart of all Israel, a desire to connect to God and not to be separated or cut off in any way, God forbid, from his absolute oneness, even if this requires actually giving up one's life. Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh means that for me being Jewish, I'm risking my life. Thank God we live in a land of the free, in a safe haven of America, but many times throughout history, and we can see even nowadays, it's not always that safe. But a person, a Jew, knowing that if he renounces his Judaism to save his life, it would disconnect him with God, he wouldn't want to do it. It's called Mesiras Nefesh. And time again throughout history, we've had stories, and we know many of these historical moments of when these things have happened. But the point over here is that every Jew has the authentic desire to be connected with God. And if he would know that that connection is in doubt or at risk, he would do whatever it takes to make sure that connection remains firm and remains strong. And that's just parenthetically, this is obviously the root, the source of where Chabadniks, Hasidim from the Rebbe, go out to the boondocks and go out to the streets and make sure to do whatever it takes to try to connect a Jew with a mitzvah. Because when deep down, that Jew wants to fulfill the mitzvah. They may be uneducated, they may be busy, but deep down they want to do it. And our job is to at least make the access point to make it possible, but the rest is history. So many times we see that when a person does a mitzvah, there's something that's unleashed from within them. It's that natural love for God that may have been dormant. It just needed a little bit of a shake. It needed a little bit of an awakening. So that's really, I mean, over and over again in Tanya and so many times in Chassidus, we have this theme of the love for God that each of us, our soul, we possess in our soul. And that's our inner desire. It may not be on the surface. That's our job to uncover. If you see someone where it's not uncovered, some good chicken soup on Friday night sometimes is what could help uncover it. The beauty of a mitzvah, let's say of Shabbos or of tefillin or Shabbos candles, or et cetera, et cetera. Above, we discussed how the innate love of your divine soul would be powerful enough to bring you to Mesiras Nefesh, to give up your life for God, if it would ever come to that. So, at least in the Kindle, it's saying we're on page 584, and it's referencing page 227. In the book, is it also on 227? Yeah, cool. Okay. So on page 227, so that's probably in the book, not the Kindle, which was in the early 20s, in the chapters of the early 20s, where it talked about this theme of not wanting to be cut off from God. The Tanya revisits this idea here, not in the literal sense of giving up your life, but in the sense of every mitzvah being a kind of devotional Mesiras Nefesh, giving over your soul to be absorbed in God. So this is a really powerful idea where in the past, Tanya was talking about Mesiras Nefesh, which literally means giving up your soul to be connected with God, meaning the full dedication, in a sense where if it came to it, we would not want to be severed from our connection with God, even if it means our very life. But over here, we're not going to that extreme or literal meaning of giving up our life. It's referring to every mitzvah we do is, in fact, allowing our soul to be fully absorbed in godliness. So every mitzvah we do could have that fulfillment or that intention that we are fully being absorbed, our soul in God, our soul is fully being absorbed in God through the fulfillment of this very mitzvah. But in reality, studying Torah and observing mitzvahs are also real Mesiras Nefesh, meaning it's not only when we're giving up our life that is considered Mesiras Nefesh of devotion. Every mitzvah has that devotion of our soul being connected with God, since they demand your single-minded devotion, similar to when your soul will leave your body at the end of your life, having fulfilled the biblical lifespan of 70 years, which we say this prayer on Shabbos. King David, who actually lived to the age of 70, he said the lifespan of man is 70 years, or for the strong ones, 80 years, and he referred to those years. So over here, the Alter Rebbe is quoting it, that he refers to it as the biblical lifespan. And it's interesting because obviously it's biblical because it's in the book of Psalms, which is a part of Tanakh, part of the Torah. But earlier in the book of Genesis, God refers to 120 years, right? And we know the life of Moses, 120 years, the full lifespan. So it's interesting to see the 70. At which point your soul's devotion to God will be a total one, will be a total devotion, a total one, since it will no longer be concerned with the body's needs. So obviously nowadays, up until our end of life, our devotion is complete through the fulfillment of the mitzvah, but we still have our bodily needs to attend to. When our soul when our soul leaves our body, the devotion is able to be complete because it's not having the bodily needs that it has to attend to. So when you study Torah or observe a mitzvah on earth with complete devotion, it's considered an act of Mesiras Nefesh, because it resembles the single-minded devotion of your soul to God when it will leave your body. So just to summarize, every mitzvah that we do today, hopefully we've each done many mitzvahs already, and every mitzvah you do has that capacity of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh means full devotion and dedication to God. So it's not only when we're ready to risk our life for God that it's considered Mesiras Nefesh. Every mitzvah carries that devotion in connecting with God. As we discussed in chapter 19, the willingness to be a martyr for God rather than transgress his will, even for a moment, is actually rooted in your love for him. So again, a martyr in Judaism means that you're ready to give up your life for the sake of not being disconnected with God. So if a person, we know, and just to give you the basics again, in Judaism, a person is required to transgress a mitzvah if his life is in danger. So obviously the basics is if it's Shabbos and we are observant, which means according to Torah and Jewish law, we're not allowed to violate the Shabbos by desecrating it in one of the 39 melachot, one of the 39 works. But let's say it's an emergency. Then you have to do whatever it takes, drive in a car. My wife gave birth on Shabbos. You go in the car and you call the midwife or the ambulance or whatever. Hopefully something happy is happening. But if there's a danger, you have to desecrate Shabbos. And the obvious reason is desecrate one Shabbos so that many Shabbos could be fulfilled. You don't want this to be your last Shabbos. But there's 3 cardinal sins that we are obligated as Jews to not violate them and be ready to give up our life. So kosher is not one of them. If a person is starving and they're going to die from hunger, you gotta eat non-kosher. That's actually the obligation. But when it comes to idolatry, if a person says, you better bow to this idol or I will kill you, you better kill that person or I will kill you, or you better have a forbidden relationship or I will kill you, you have to be ready to stand up. And again, the Hebrew word is Mesiras Nefesh, be ready to give up your life or dedicate your life for the sake of God. And in Hebrew, it's called a martyr.
There's adultery.
Yeah, did I not say that?
No, there are 3. So
idol worship. I said forbidden relations. So it's adultery.
Yeah, adultery and murdering someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think I said all 3, but okay, it's good to repeat. Okay, awesome. So I just didn't refer to it as adultery. I said forbidden relations.
Yes,
yeah. In other words, that's
thank you.
Okay, awesome. So the point over here that we're saying is that a martyr is where does a Jew get that power to be ready to connect to God and not transgress, even for a moment, to be disconnected from God even for a moment, is because he has a love for God that he doesn't even realize just how deep that love is, but it's rooted inside of him, that most of the time is dormant, but it's there. So only there, I'm reading, continuing in the paragraph, is expressed in a negative way when we refer to it as a reverence that is contained in love. In the everyday setting, when your life isn't threatened, thank God, you can draw on the same Mesiras Nefesh energy from your soul to intensify the devotional quality of your worship. So you can tap into this love to fulfill a mitzvah today, that you can have an intensity in the fulfillment of a mitzvah with the same Mesiras Nefesh. Basically, your soul could be on fire today. Usually, most people, unless they're pushed against the wall, they just live a casual life. They'll do a mitzvah when it's convenient. They'll say the prayer with whatever is going through their mind. But of course, when a person feels that their end is near, everything is so much more valuable, they're on fire. So over here, he's saying you could draw into that fire and that devotion today, every day. If you meditate the idea that my mitzvah is fully devoted, and my soul is being fully connected with God, that's called Mesiras Nefesh. So it's not about when my life is threatened only. Even on a simple Wednesday, you're able to draw into that Mesiras Nefesh and have that quality in our worship of being fully devoted to God. Having mentioned that the soul is free from the concerns of the body in heaven. Oh, so we said that earlier, that when we said that the lifespan of a man is 70 or 80 years, we said that after our purpose is complete, when your soul leaves the body, then it's not having to be concerned with the body's needs. So he now discusses briefly what the soul will be doing. Oh, so that's cool. So nowadays we know what the soul is doing. It's involved in the world and it's doing good. But what happens after the soul is released from its body, which means it doesn't have to tend to its bodily needs after. So rather in heaven, what happens, your soul's thoughts will be completely devoted to and immersed in the heavenly worlds of the Torah and prayer, which are God's word and his thoughts, which with which the soul will be totally one. So nowadays, our mind is involved in a mitzvah, but our mind is also involved in paying rent or paying a mortgage and making ends meet and raising a family. All important and worthwhile things. But when our soul does not have the bodily needs to tend to, then our soul will be fully devoted to Torah and prayer, which is amazing. So which means our soul will be fully one with God's words and his thoughts. For as we know, this immersion in Torah and prayer is the singular occupation of the souls in Gan Eden. As stated in the Talmud, in Tractate Brachot, and in the Zohar, who again, his yahrzeit, the Rebbe Shimon, we observe starting this Eden. Only there in heaven, it's extremely pleasurable for the souls to engage with God's light and be absorbed in it. Whereas in the earthly Torah experience, this dimension is lacking. We don't see the pleasure in our soul connecting with God as we do in the heavens. After our soul leaves its body, then the pleasure could be complete, the pleasure could be felt of seeing that unity between our soul and godliness and godly light. But nowadays, we don't have that appreciation. The Tanya will now show. Okay, we're doing good, everyone. The Tanya will now show that the kavanah of devotional Mesiras Nefesh is conveyed by a passage in the morning prayers. So let's go through our morning prayers. We're going to say a quote. It's the third paragraph we say in the morning after the Moda Ani. And we then do a blessing of on our hands. And after going to the bathroom for a healthy system, we then say like this. This explains why the sages compose the following to be said at the beginning of the morning blessings before the prayers. Elokai, or my God, the soul which you have gave me is pure. You breathed it into me, and you will eventually take it from me. It makes sense that we thank God for placing our souls in our bodies, and that you breathed it into me. That makes sense. It's a neshama. God breathed it into me. But what's the point in adding in our prayers that you will eventually take it from me? Why do we want to say that at the beginning of our morning? This, the Tanya suggests, hints to our above idea of having single-minded devotion while the soul is in the body, comparable to its devotion in heaven after parting from the body. So we're not praying that our bodies should be separated from our soul, but what we're praying for in these words is that the devotion that we're able to have now in our prayers should be similar to the way our devotion, the way our soul has it in Gan Eden. In other words, since you breathe it into me, and you will eventually take it from me, which is the quote from the prayer. Therefore, right now, today on Wednesday, I will try to approach the level when you will eventually take it from me. And I will give I give my soul over and return it to you to merge it with your oneness. As the verse states, to you, God, I lift up my soul. And the way I do this is by devotionally tying my thoughts to your thoughts and my words to your words through the Torah and prayer text, which I study and recite, with the devotion of a disembodied soul in heaven. So that's why we start our morning with a prayer that God, you have given me, you breathed into me a soul, and you will take it from me. We're not asking God to take it from me, but we're trying to identify that the devotion I have today in the prayer and the Torah study could be similar to the devotion of a soul in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden after 120. And my feeling of handing my soul to you is especially pronounced when addressing God directly in the second person. So we're not talking to God as his name in the third person, but we're referring to God directly, which you have given. Let's see where your quote said. Blessed when the sense of his presence is particularly acute, such as blessed are you, etc. A text which implies that he is standing in front of you because you're referring to God as you, direct. And that's actually a commentary of why we refer to God in the second person, because it's a direct, we're speaking to God directly. And it is with this morning preparation of Mesiras Nefesh, or devotion to God, you should begin to say the morning prayers, which are if you continue in the prayers, it's amazing. We thank God for the wisdom, and then we thank God for being able to stretch. We thank God for opening our eyes. We thank God for clothing us. We thank God for all the beautiful blessings that we have every day. The Tanya now advises how this kavana should influence Torah study. Just parenthetical, let's see. Okay, let's try to finish. So I will share that later. So that's about in our prayer. But now how does this kavana, which is again, the kavana is that we are in a full devotion with God, that my study of Torah, or really my prayer, is fully connecting my soul with Hashem, similar to the way it is in the state of martyrdom, or when our soul totally leaves our body. We're able to do that today through the fulfillment of a mitzvah and through prayer. Now we talks about how you see this in Torah study, and with this preparation, you should begin a regular study session straight after prayer. So many people, if they study in synagogue, straight from prayer, if they pray in synagogue, they try to study Torah, because and actually in our prayer, I don't know if people are familiar, but we say Ein Kelokeinu, which is many people like it because it's towards the end of prayer. So it's right before Kiddush. But right after that, we say a certain section of study. We read a halacha in that section, because we right away want to combine our prayer with study of Torah. What's the point? With this preparation, you should begin the Torah study. We said that, and so too in the course of the day, you need to make this preparation at least before you begin to study. Again, the preparation that this study is connecting me directly with God, even though you will not be able to maintain it during study, when you will be focusing on the context, on the content of the text. So when you're studying, you can't be thinking so much and about my devotion to God. You have to think about the text. You have to think about trying to understand it, putting your mind into it. So to put your mind into it, you have to think less about the devotion to God and more about the text that you're studying. So you can't think about it during the study, but you should think about it before the study. Since, as we know in the case of the Beinani, who don't remain in a state of enraptured consciousness of the divine at all times, right? That's a tzaddik. A tzaddik is fully present in their conscious mind to be connected with God. A Beinani doesn't have it. They always struggle. They can't keep that focus. So therefore, for a Beinani, they have to have the preparation that before the Torah study, they have this intention of the devotion. The crucial key preparation to ensure that study is for the mitzvah sake is at the outset of study, when they are actually studying, their minds will be focused on understanding the text and not on the presence of God. So I think someone asked me several weeks ago, how do we keep this kavana during Torah study? And we're actually making it pretty clear that you don't have it during Torah study if you're a Beinani. You have it before Torah study, that I'm studying for the sake of connecting with God. But once you open the book and begin the study, then you're more studying the text and trying to put your mind into understanding. The Tanya now offers an illustration from Jewish law, from which we see that having kavanah at the outset of study is sufficient. So that even if you're not having it during the entire study session, only at the beginning, that counts. That's what you need to have. And this is similar to the case of a get. A get is a divorce document, a divorce between a Jewish husband and wife, or a Torah scroll. When a sofer, a scribe, writes a Torah scroll, where writing the text with the correct intention is a crucial condition in the document's validity. But that doesn't mean that the scribe must have this intent the whole time he's writing. Rather, it's sufficient for the scribe to say at the outset of the writing, I'm writing this as a holy Torah scroll. Or in the case of a get, I'm writing this for him and for her as a bill of divorce. So just to give you, this is a beautiful example that the Alter Rebbe gives us, just like when it comes to writing a Torah, that you can't expect the sofer, the scribe, to have the intention of writing the Torah the entire time he's writing. His mind has to be on making sure the text is accurate, making sure the letter is written correctly. He can't be thinking of God. Of course, it's in his background, in his subconscious, but he's thinking of the letter. He's thinking of making sure the text is being copied direct. As long as he says, before he writes, I'm doing this for the sake of writing a Torah, for the right sake. Or if it's a bill of divorce that's being written by the scribe, I'm writing this for the divorce of so-and-so and so-and-so to be divorced. That itself counts as being written for the right reason, for the right devotion, for the right intention. So similar to that, the Alter Rebbe draws the parallel that when it comes to studying Torah, as long as before studying, you have this intention that I'm studying for the sake of my devotion to God and connecting my soul with God, that itself counts as the right kavanah, the right intention. However, if you study for a very long period, it's not sufficient merely to have this intent at the outset. And your kavanah needs to be periodically refreshed. So you have to click the refresh button maybe every hour. Let's see what, that's what I think he says. But if you study for several hours in a row, you ought to contemplate the content of the above preparation at least once per hour. So I love that idea. Take a pause every hour and recalibrate yourself that you're studying or you're praying for the sake of my connection with God. This advice is based on the command, be careful not to forget God. Pentishkach, we say is actually a part of the 6 remembrances that we're supposed to say every day. It's taken from Moshe in Deuteronomy, which means you are warned to remember God at all times. And the Kabbalists have written that God's sacred name has 12 anagrams. Let me see the Hebrew word for that. No, he doesn't. This is just a quote from Sefer Haredim, which is a Kabbalistic book written by Rabbi Elazar Askari. So God's name has 12 anagrams with which he conducts the world during the 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of night. And he has commanded us not to forget him during any one of those hours. So some of you are familiar. Tell me if you remember this part of the Torah where Amalek wages war with the Jews. They attack the Jews. And it says that and then that's one war. And then in later time with Joshua, he also waged war against them. But it says, let's just take the story of Joshua. Joshua kept the sun from setting. Does anyone remember that story? It happened on the 3rd of Tammuz. If I'm not mistaken, the year was 2488 of creation. The Jews were entering Israel. There was a war. And Shemesh begivan dom, the sun remained standing or remained from setting for an extra hour or two. Because it says the Amalekites knew the hours of the constellations, and they were trying to tap into the certain hour when God's attribute of Gevurah, which is justice and discipline or strength, and severity was more dominant. So Joshua knew that they were trying to do that, and therefore he had to check into it and try to delay that from coming. So I'm not going to go into that whole system, but the point is that every hour of the day, a new energy of God is what's dominant. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe is using this as the source, or maybe the translation is quoting this as a source for that same idea that every hour you should pause from your Torah study and refresh and recalibrate your intention that is for the sake of connecting myself to God. Okay, we're pretty close with you, no? Okay, we will end with this last paragraph, just to squeeze in, elaborating on this last idea. Because every hour there's a different flow of energy from the upper world to the lower worlds. As the unit of energy flow from the previous hour returns to a source, according to the secret of the world, oscillating energy, which is constantly running and returning to and fro from its source, as mentioned in Sefer Yetzirah, which is known as the book of formation from the Arizal. And when the energy of the previous hour returns, it goes back along with all the Torah and the deeds from the lower worlds performed during that time. For each hour is ruled by a different anagram of one of God's sacred names. So again, there's 12 anagrams during day, 12 more at night. Every hour when we study, you're taking that energy of God, that every hour is being returned to that attribute or that name of God, that anagram of God's name, and it's being returned. So all the Torah mitzvahs that I've done during that hour is being connected to on high. So every hour, it's a good thing to pause and when you're studying Torah and reflect and refresh your energy to be back to that hour. So it continues along this theme. God willing, we'll continue next week. But just to end with a practical lesson, also tap into your soul's ability, and this is on 520. Stop sharing, I guess. For single-minded devotion, which is Mesiras Nefesh, the feeling that your soul belongs to God, and you are returning it from Him through worship. Do this before prayer and before study. And during study, stop and refresh this intent every hour, because all the worship in the universe returns to God each hour. All right, we'll end the class. For those that want to stay on and ask questions, you're welcome to. But I know we went a little